Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This video is for Mr. Watts AP World History for week 12, November 9th through November 13th. And this video is for Key Concept 4.5 through 4.8 lecture. So remember, you need to get the Quizlet done this week, and you need to get the discussion in by Friday. Click on the Discussions tab. The Unit 4 discussion is now posted, and your Chapter 15 reading guide is due by this Friday. But this video is for Key Concept 4.5 through 4.8 lecture. 4.5, Maritime Empires Maintained and Developed, and 4.5 gets us into government and an economic system that's associated with those governments. So Key Concept 4.5 is about mercantilism primarily, and it's about the economic system that was used by, in particular, the divine right monarchs, the Spanish, the French. Mercantilism and mercantilist policies and practices were used by European rulers to expand and control their economies and claim overseas territories. Joint stock companies influenced by these mercantilist principles were used by rulers and merchants to finance exploration, and were used by rulers to compete against one another in global trade. And in particular competition, we're talking about like the Portuguese and the Spanish, the Dutch and the English. These competitions led to rivalries and conflicts between states. So first of all, mercantilism is an economic system where merchants would issue out these documents called charters. These charters would create monopoly companies in certain regions of the world that would come to dominate trade in particular regions. Maybe the most well-known of these is the Dutch East India Trading Company. The Dutch East India Trading Company was a corporation that in today's money would be worth something like $8 trillion. I mean, it's just a fantastically wealthy corporation. And the Dutch East India Trading Company, represented by this symbol, the VOC, came to dominate trade of the spices from Indonesia. Some of the disputes include Muslim-European rivalry in the Indian Ocean, rivalry between, say, the Portuguese and the Omanis, rivalry that the Omanis would, for a while, actually win as they took over the fort that the Portuguese had created in East Africa, Fort Jesus. Moroccan conflict with the Songhai Empire also is included. Morocco would win this, and it would weaken and destabilize West Africa and make it open to, say, the slave trades. The Atlantic trading system involved the movement of goods, wealth, and labor, including slaves. Okay, so we oftentimes refer to this as triangular trade, the trade from, say, Western Europe to West Africa that included, say, trade of guns and salt. What they would then trade for, usually slaves, that would go across what's known as the Middle Passage, as those slaves were brought to Brazil, the Caribbean, and to a much lesser extent, Dixie, the U.S. South. And then they would trade, say, rum or just plain sugar with colonies in North America, and then they would take that rum and sugar and take it back across the Atlantic and make a profit every time. So, trade included firearms, salt, rum, slaves, sugar, and included the Middle Passage that was primarily concerned with the trade of slaves. The new global circulation of goods was facilitated by chartered European monopoly companies and the global flow of silver, especially from Spanish colonies in the Americas, which was used to purchase Asian goods for the Atlantic markets and to satisfy Chinese demand for silver. So if you'll remember, in the Ming Dynasty, the Chinese had demanded that all taxes be paid in the form of silver, which meant that there was huge demand for silver inside China, which primarily the Spanish supplied via trade across the Pacific Ocean. And they would do so using these chartered European monopoly companies that would use silver to facilitate that trade. Regional markets continued to flourish in Afro-Eurasia. The big four trading networks, the Silk Road, the Mediterranean Basin, the Trans-Saharan Trade Network, and the Indian Ocean. All of those trade networks continued in this time period using established commercial practices and new transoceanic and regional shipping services developed by European merchants. Peasant and artisanal labor continued and intensified in many regions as the demand for food and consumer goods increased. These include the production of wool and linen in Western Europe, India, which continued to produce the majority of the world's cotton in this time period. India continued in this time period to be the region of the world that provided the most clothing to the rest of the world, and silk, which was produced primarily in China, but by this time period was also being produced in the areas around Greece and the Ottoman Empire. Some notable gender and family restructuring occurred, including demographic changes in Africa that resulted from the slave trades. So if you'll remember, West Africa was primarily depopulated of men, and so they ended up with a female majority. East Africa was depopulated of women and had a male majority. And in the Americas, in both North and South America, there was a majority of men and a minority of women. The Atlantic trading system involved the movement of labor, primarily slave labor, but also like indentured servants and so on, including slaves, and the mixing of African American and European cultures and peoples, with all parties contributing to this cultural synthesis. In some cases, the increase and intensification of interactions between newly connected hemispheres expanded the reach and further development of existing religions and contributed to religious conflicts and the developments of syncretic belief systems and practices. Some of these include Vodun. Vodun is a syncretic religious system. The practices of that system are called voodoo rituals, primarily inside the Caribbean and to a lesser extent, like, say, Louisiana or Alabama. It's a syncretic religion that developed in the African diaspora that accompanied the slave trade. It's found throughout the Caribbean. Vodun mixes West African beliefs with European Christianity. A voodoo ceremony, for example, is what started the Haitian Rebellion in 1791. That would lead to the dissolving of the slave system in its entirety, eventually inside the entire Atlantic region. Another syncretic belief system is Sikhism, which originated in the Punjab province of northern India. Sikhism is based on the teachings of the first Guru Nanak. Today, Sikhism is the 9th largest religion on earth. Drawing from both Islam and Hinduism, Sikhism teaches unity, selfless service, social justice, honesty, and prosperity for all peoples. And the majority of Sikhs in the world today live inside South Asia, inside India. Another example is Sufism. Sufism is also known as Islamic mysticism. Sufism dates back to the post-classical period. It's not a separate sect like the Sunni or Shia, but Sufis are characterized by their dancing rituals. They tend to spin in circles. Their mystic characteristics help them spread Islam in Africa, Central Asia, and the Far East. And another example is Protestantism. Protestantism officially starts in Europe, in Germany, in what we today would call Germany, and it starts with Martin Luther in 1517. The Protestants created the third major branch of, this should say Christianity, not Islam. It's a mistake by Ben Freeman. Anyway, Catholic, Orthodox, and then third is Protestantism. The different beliefs included the rejection of the papacy or the Pope as one of the official sources of power within inside the religion, and instead believed in the literal word of the Bible instead of the papacy and the Catholic Church hierarchy. They rejected the idea of indulgences also. They believe in justification by faith in God alone, as opposed to the authority of the Catholic Church. Next is the Sunni-Shia split. The divisions between the two largest sects in Islam, the Sunni-Shia split, roughly 90% of Muslim people today are Sunni and about 10% are Shia. It dates back to the succession of leadership after the death of the founder of the religion, Muhammad. Sunnis side with the first Caliph Abu Bakr, while Shiites believe Muhammad's cousin Ali should have succeeded him. The split is brought up here due to the geopolitical dispute between the Sunni Ottomans and the Safavid Shiites. Next up is the Catholic Protestant split. With roots in the last era, the split between Western Christianity began with Luther's 95 Theses on Halloween in 1517. The religious divide dominated Europe for the next 150 years. This division coincided with the Age of Exploration and served as a main motivating factor in the competition between those that were Catholics. They are the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the French, and those who were the Protestants, and they are the Dutch and the British. It takes us to key concept 4.6, internal and external challenges to state power from 1450 to 1750. State expansion and centralization led to resistance from an array of social, political, and economic groups on a local level. Those include the Pueblo revolts inside the Americas. Perhaps the most prominent example is Pope's Uprising. Pope's Uprising was an example of a Pueblo revolt against the Spanish Empire. In 1680, the Native Americans of what is modern-day Santa Fe, New Mexico, rose up in rebellion against the Spanish. The Native Americans killed something like 400 Spaniards and forced the rest of the Spanish colonizers to leave. In France, this includes the Fronde rebellions. In France, a series of rebellions against the French monarch Louis XIV happened from 1648 to 1653. Louis managed to crush the rebellions and centralized control to such a high degree that historians begin using the phrase absolute monarch to describe the French monarchy after this time period. Next are Cossack revolts. Cossacks are known for their very fierce and successful warriors. They originated from Poland, the area from Poland through Lithuania and Russia. And from the 16th through the 18th centuries, they rebelled against these three kingdoms. They frequently raided the Ottoman Empire and expanded north and east across Eurasia. Next up is the Maratha conflict with the Mughals. The Marathas are a caste of Hindus that are native to India. They created a Maratha kingdom that fought until the 19th century against the Mughal sultans. And then next is Anna Nzinga's resistance as a ruler of Ndongo and Matamba. Anna Nzinga was a 17th century queen of modern-day Angola who fought a series of rebellions against the Portuguese. And then next up is Metacom's War, which is more commonly known as King Philip's War in the United States today. The New England settlers referred to Metacom as King Philip because they didn't like to refer to him as his real Native American name. But Metacom was a Wampanoag leader that was called Philip by the Pilgrims that settled New England. The English settlers fought a war against the Native Americans of the region from 1675 to 1678. The war was destructive to both the English settlers and the indigenous Native Americans, but much of New England was depopulated of Native Americans as a result of the conflict. Next is slave resistance. Slaves resisted against the entire system of slavery from the very beginning of it. They rebelled in the Americas. An example is the creation of maroon societies inside the Caribbean and inside Brazil. Maroon societies are just societies of people who have escaped slavery and who are living together. They include areas of, like, for instance, the western part of the state of Virginia that had a maroon society inside the swamps where there were mosquitoes that, the white settlers didn't want to go into. And then there's North American slave resistance. Like in Latin America, North American slaves resisted by escaping, by breaking tools, and other methods of trying to resist slavery. One example is the Great Dismal Swamp Maroons, who occupied the swamps in the western part of what is now the state of Virginia and North Carolina. And state rivalries existed. They include the 30 Years' War in Europe that was primarily a conflict between Protestants and Catholics that went on from 1618 to 1648, and the Ottoman-Safavid conflict, which went on all throughout the 16th century and then culminated in a big war from 1623 to 1639. So the 30 Years' War concluded with the creation of the Peace of Westphalia, which is included in the AP Euro curriculum, and it's perhaps one of the places where we'll dip into their examples. The Peace of Westphalia was created in 1648, which marked the effective end of the medieval idea of trying to create this universal Christian theocracy called Christendom. And it accelerated the decline of the Holy Roman Empire by granting princes, bishops, and other local leaders control over religion. So many states, like the Mughal and the Ottoman empires, adopted practices to accommodate the ethnic and religious diversity over their subjects, or to utilize the economic, political, and military contributions of different ethnic or religious groups. So one of the key points to make is that it's really hard to rule over diverse peoples. Diverse peoples tend to have very different cultures, and all of these new empires that we get created in this time period that are full of very diverse peoples end up being very difficult to rule over. In other cases, states suppress diversity, and this includes, like, for instance, the 13 colonies or the English colonies inside North America. They tended to want to limit and suppress diversity, and the United States that would be created after that tended to have a whole lot less diversity than, for instance, Latin American regions. And they tried to limit certain groups' roles in society, politics, or the economy. Examples of differential treatment of groups in society, politics, and the economy include the expulsion of Jews from Spain and Portugal. There's this thing known as the Spanish Inquisition, where they subjected Jews to torture and expelled them out of the empire. In Spain, Isabella of Castile ordered Torquemada to create the Inquisition in the 15th century, which required everyone to convert to Catholicism in the country. Many people were tortured, and something between 3,000 and 5,000 people were executed for not converting fully to Catholicism. In contrast, in the Ottoman Empire, Jews were allowed to pay a tax known as the jizya and allowed to continue to practice their religion if they paid that extra tax called the jizya. So, one of the other changing social hierarchies involves restrictive policies against the Han Chinese in the Qing dynasty in China. In 1644, the Manchus conquered China, and remember that the Chinese do not think of the Manchus as ethnically Han Chinese peoples. They think of them as foreigners because they're from northeast of the Great Wall. The Manchus conquered China and created the last of the Chinese dynasties, the Qing dynasty, which ruled from 1644 until 1911. The Chinese considered the Manchus foreigners, and the Manchus restricted ethnic Hans from holding positions in the government. Varying status of different classes of women existed inside the Ottoman Empire. In the Ottoman Empire, which was very large and diverse, again, it included areas of southeastern Europe, it included North Africa, it included much of the Middle East. Women of different social classes, religion, and ethnicity held different levels of influence. Under Suleiman the Magnificent, the most important of the Ottoman emperors, the harem gained a great amount of power and women exerted strong influence, and this continued for several centuries inside the Ottoman Empire. Again, the Ottoman Empire won't collapse fully until after World War I. Imperial conquests and widening global economic opportunities contributed to the formation of new political and economic elites, including China with the transition of the Ming Dynasty to becoming the Qing Dynasty in 1644, and in the Americas with the rise of the casta system. So, in the Chinese Qing Empire, for instance, at the bottom of the system were slaves, although China never really had a large number of slaves, they always had some. Above them are merchants. In Confucian societies, merchants tend to be lower on the social class. Above them are artisans, and then peasants, and then palace, court nobles, government officials. And in the Qing Empire, ethnically Han Chinese people were not allowed to hold some of these elite positions. And then, of course, there's the emperor at the top. And then in Latin America, in Spanish colonies, there was the casta system. The casta system involves African slaves and Native Americans at the bottoms, people of European and African descent above them, known as mulattoes, people of European and Native American descent above them, called mestizos, Creoles above them, and then peninsulares above them. And existing elites continued in some cases. These involved the Ottoman Timars, who were landowners that were granted control over areas by the Ottoman government inside the Ottoman Empire, or the Russian boyars. Boyars is just another way of saying elites. These were some of the nobles that lived inside the Russian Empire, and they had more influence and lesser influence under some of the different Russian emperors. And then, of course, there's the European gentry, or the European nobility, which continued through this entire time period. Key concept 4.8 tells us that we need to have our discussion. The discussion is now posted. The final topic of this unit focuses on the skill of argumentation, and so provides an opportunity for the students to draw upon the key concepts and historical developments that you've studied in this unit. Using evidence relevant to the unit's key concepts, students should practice the suggested skill for this key concept, argumentation. So to review, key concept 4.1, the interconnection of the Eastern and Western hemispheres made possible by transoceanic voyaging, transformed trade, and had a significant social impact on the world as the Columbian Exchange opened, which totally changed both Afro-Eurasia and the Americas. Knowledge, scientific learning, and technology from the classical Islamic and Asian world spread, facilitating European technological developments and innovation. The developments included the production of new tools, innovations in ship designs, and an improved understanding of regional wind and current patterns, all of which made transoceanic travel and trade possible. Although the world's productive systems continued to be heavily centered on agriculture, major changes occurred in agricultural labor. The systems and locations of manufacturing, gender and social structures, and environmental processes. The demand for labor intensified as a result of the growing global demand for raw materials and finished products. Traditional peasant agriculture increased and changed in nature. Plantations expanded, and the Atlantic slave trade developed and intensified. Empires achieved increased scope and influence around the world, shaping and being shaped by the diverse populations they incorporated. Economic disputes led to rivalries and conflict between states. Maritime empires were created and had massive political, social, and labor consequences. Maritime empires continued, and Europeans practiced mercantilist policies. States faced internal and external challenges, and results varied. The interconnection of so much of the globe led to the creation of new social hierarchies like the casta system. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Key Concepts 4.5 through 4.8. Good luck this week.